On mute.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to wait a minute or two as we see people still signing on. We're glad you're here, so stay tuned. Doug, you got to move your head a little bit to make sure everyone knows that this is not a still shot.
Or that I'm not a Gen AI hallucination.
Now, one of the new AI things with these new laptops is that it actually can clone your eyes so that when you're looking off to the sides, the AI will make it look like you're actually looking at the camera all times. I could use that.
Should use that. I can do that since we're both in our virtual offices.
Yeah. All right, for those who joined, we're going to start in about a minute. A number of people are still logging in, and as I see the numbers coming in, I don't want to leave anybody out from the beginning. I will say this again, this session is being recorded so that if you do miss any of this, you can come back or share this with your colleagues. All right, I want to welcome everybody. We are going to start. As I mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded, so if you miss any of it, you can look back at it later. We will send out the links for anybody who registered. We want to thank you for joining us in what I think is our fourth or fifth year of what's on the state and local government IT radar for the next 6 months. I'm honored to be with my colleague, Doug Robinson, Executive Director of NESIO, our sister organization. I'm Alan Shark, and I'm the Executive Director of PTI. I should say that this is something that we have put together as a result of never having enough time when we have done our annual January event, where we always seem to run out of time. There's no shortage of questions and discussion. And that's the time of year when we have all our survey results and we have much to share at that time. So there was a sense that maybe we should have a mid-year. So this is our newer format that we offer. So again, stay tuned for January because that's when we do our first event. And some 4 years ago was the beginnings of this. So we want to thank you for being many hundreds of the many hundreds who have signed up. I want to remind you that this will be more interactive, a little less focus on our presentations, although both of us have some few things that we would like to share. And this is your chance to ask the executive directors, which is really the theme of what this is all about. What are the areas of focus of IT executives for the rest of 2024? What's the latest on budgeting, operational, and management priorities for state and local IT? And what should CIOs, what they should be considering as they meet with policy leaders and internal customers on the employment of artificial intelligence for government services as it grows? So Doug, we've done this before. I'm honored once again to be with you, and I'm going to turn it to you.
Honored as well, sir. And let me remark, and Alan and I have been talking in the last few weeks. We are both in our 21st year in our respective roles as executive directors of these associations representing state and local governments. Which, if you look at the data in terms of the average length of of chief executives and associations is a little over 7 years. So we have stood the test of time, Dr. Shark. So
We are the youngest of the dinosaurs.
we are the youngest. We are the youngest of the dinosaurs. So let me go ahead and share some of my data today. And this will be a quick recap for those of you who know the NASCIO top 10. I wanted to go back to the 2024 top 10 just as a foundation to some of my remarks. And talk about the fact that in 2024 we had a couple of historic items occur in this electronic voting and the balloting that we do. We have done since 2007, where we present the top 10 perspectives of state CIOs. So the state CIOs are actually completed this first choice ballot online, and then we aggregate all that data in each December release the 2024, the next calendar year top 10. And you can see here that the interesting thing that occurred for the first time in the history of our top 10. We had a tie for number one between cybersecurity, digital government, digital services. That obviously reflects a number of things. Cybersecurity, number 10 for 10 consecutive years. Number one for 10 consecutive years, and now number one tie with digital services. So that was certainly one very interesting occurrence. Not surprising, it was close. I was found it interesting that it was tie. We had put out a white paper in October of 2023, which is our president's initiative on improving the citizen experience with digital services, and really looking at historical perspective and urging the states with a call to action to address some of those challenges and some of those deficiencies and really moving forward. The other more interesting thing really was the fact that AI, artificial intelligence, Gen AI, the whole stack of what I'll call traditional and then generative AI, went from not being on the top 10 the previous year, rocketed up to number 3. And so we're going to talk about that today. I don't think we could have a webcast without talking about Gen AI and AI. We've got a lot of pre-submitted questions that are around artificial intelligence, particularly Gen AI. And you see some of the other items on this list, which are perennial. They simply move around, and they're based on really the continued maturity of the states. At one time, cloud services was as high as number 2 as a priority for several years, and you can see as more states adopt the cloud model, and certainly off-premise cloud and software as a service becomes the predominant approach to the operating model. We see cloud services as less of a priority and simply standard operating procedure. The other one that was interesting, coming in at number 11, was consolidation optimization, which continues in the states at some level, but for many years it was number 1 before cyber. And so that was the number 1 priority, was consolidating infrastructure, consolidating services, consolidating a larger scope, and in some cases, even consolidating and centralizing the IT workforce, which some states have done. So these are topics that we'll continue to discuss, and NASCIO addresses many of these throughout the year with white papers and surveys and research. And so I'll talk to some of those today. So let's kind of look at what's trending, and then I'll quickly go into a couple of data points from surveys that we have yet to release. And so I'm going to give you some preliminary results. I mentioned digital services. I think many of the challenges around this were apparent during the pandemic and during the challenges of delivering state services in a virtual format. Citizens were not satisfied by the ability of the states to deliver those services online. This experience was not modern. It wasn't human-centered design. It didn't feel like their consumer experience, and I think many states heard those complaints. And so we're seeing a lot more attention to improving that citizen-centric approach to online services and digital government. As I mentioned, growing cloud and SaaS adoption, and we're seeing that whole process being rationalized by a lot of states by creating cloud broker agreements. And we're seeing the broader adoption of off-premise cloud solutions, including things like mainframe as a service. A larger number of states now have moved to mainframe as a service, off-premise, and often cloud. Broader adoption of business process, robotic process automation. Some of those tools, again, these were predominantly brought on by pandemic and have now become a part of their portfolio. So what they're doing. The workforce, we could spend 2 hours talking about the IT workforce and the requirement for more flexibility. States continue to have challenges around recruitment, retention. We have the retirement impact. They're looking at reforms, things like focused on skills-based hiring, eliminating the four-year degree in a number of states. Almost 16 now, I believe, have eliminated the four-year degree requirement for almost all state jobs, including IT. So we're seeing states that clearly have a challenge in recruiting cybersecurity professionals, eliminating the four-year degree requirement, going to a two-year degree with certifications, or base it on experience and competency and not a degree at all. And I think you're going to see more and more of that because states continue to struggle with having the qualified capabilities and disciplines in their workforce in a wide range of domains. And you will see that as I talk about the data. This is a challenge. Not surprisingly, AI and generative AI, with the release of ChatGPT in the public domain and in late 2022, we've seen multiple states introduce legislation, 18, I think, in 2023, 40 states already, almost 800 bills had some reference to artificial intelligence during the 2024 sessions. Many of them have already ended, but we still have a few states that have annual sessions and are still discussing these. We still see multiple bills looking at that. And if you look at specifically on the governance side, what they're doing is making requirements for the executive branch, and I'll go through that list here very quickly, and you can see some of the topics that I'll cover. And then finally, we've seen a significant increase over the last year, and I expect that's something will continue to trend in state technology policy discussions and particularly legislation. The National Conference of State Legislature meeting is coming up here close to me in Louisville in just a couple of weeks, and the agenda already is packed with topics around artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. These are things that we're going to see more and more discussions by legislators, and we've seen them introduce a host of bills. Some have already been enacted around things like data privacy, AI issues concerning deep fakes and elections and campaigning and campaign ads. Many of them, that's been a big focus during their 2024 sessions. And something we had documented last year in our survey was the list of prohibited products, prohibited solutions and platforms at the state level continues to get attention, not surprisingly, starting with TikTok, but other types of media and social media platforms. Almost 80% of the states have some controls or restrictions that they place, particularly about their own employees using those products within the executive branch. So I'm going to touch on number one topic, cybersecurity in the top 10. So just quickly from our preliminary analysis, again, this is data that has yet to be released. We'll be releasing our Deloitte and Assio biennial study. This is the kind of the preeminent study on cybersecurity in the states. It's a very significant and robust data set, lots to look at, lots to report on. But one question I thought that I would provide to our audience today was the question we asked our state chief information security officers to identify their cybersecurity initiatives for the next couple of years. And then these are ranked by the order in terms of the data we received. Align cybersecurity initiatives with those of the business. Continuing challenge in state government is to make sure that you have those alignment with all those different agencies, Health and Human Services and Labor and Environmental Protection and Justice, Revenue. You think about the wide scope of the responsibilities in state government. That is really an important thing, is to make sure you align that. We see many states moving to more of a centralized governance and operational and policy model for cyber. That's something that NASCIO has recommended, that states begin to move in that direction. About 60% of the states are already there, where they have essentially under the CIO umbrella responsibilities for cybersecurity for the executive branch. IAM, again, continuing, it was on the top 10 list this year. This is critical to the foundational element or foundational pillar for moving to zero trust, but also foundational for a seamless and secure citizen engagement. And we see a number of states that are creating identity as a service models, because this is critical to delivering services to citizens and business in the state, having a very broad identity and access management solution for digital credentials and digital transactions for citizens, and many of them have already done it in the executive branch. Conducting risk assessments, they're going to continue to do that, vulnerability analysis and vulnerability assessments across the agencies. There are continued concerns, obviously, about cloud platforms as these clouds move more off-prem, and you're looking at a wide range of cloud services. You're looking at how to secure those hypervisors and that visibility into multiple cloud solutions. And then finally, the local government angle comes in at number 5. I think this was driven by the federal grant program, and we're going to see more and more of that interaction to promote the whole of state model, which is really around reaching out to those local governments. This has been a significant challenge across the country because just the sheer numbers that we're dealing with, and the lack of funding that the CIO office has and the CISO to do this. This is not something that's part of their budget, and so using the grant funds to do that, it helps. And the question is that sustainable in the future if they're providing shared services to their local governments and school districts and others? Let me move on for AI, and we'll end with a few topics around AI, particularly generative AI. Uh, with all the conversations, NASCIO obviously has its own Gen AI task force that's been meeting now, and we're looking at all the other different aspects of particularly generative AI, but just the considerations around AI and adoption in the states. States have been using traditional kind of AI tools for many, many years. They've been out there, they've been utilized, perhaps not under any kind of policy framework or set of regulatory conditions, but that's we're seeing. We've seen that change very quickly with Gen AI. This is the kind of roadmap, the summary we put out in late 2023, and provided essentially 12 steps. It said if you're developing a strategy at your state level, if you're developing a set of policies, you're developing a framework, these are 12 things that you should consider as you're doing that. And we've seen this again grow across the states, and we've collected more recent data, which I'll provide you about what's going on in the states. I've identified 3 key areas that we think are critical that need more attention. One is that whole governance model, again, identifying those decision rights, who's going to be responsible for this across the executive branch, which is the area of authority for our state CIOs. There's serious concerns about data quality and the source of data bias. And then, of course, the big gap for all the states is the workforce expertise and capabilities. And I think Alan will probably talk. That's what we're seeing in local governments as well. So we've identified and started to categorize across the states what were the states doing on AI, and you see these are the actions in large buckets across all the states. So we've been inventorying that, and this is what we've seen in the last year or so about what states are doing across a range, starting at the high level around perhaps even mandated requirements through legislative action or through executive orders. We've seen a lot of that through the states, creating these governance bodies, advisory committees, task forces. Some of these are mixed. They are internal to state government. Others have private sector members. A number of them have legislative action. They're actually formed. The task force is created by a legislative body, and they are meeting and convening and holding testimony and asking for information from the agencies. And you can see the states are in a kind of a mixed bag on this, but there's several of these where a predominant number of the states have already addressed some of these topics. And so for the next sneak peek at our latest data coming out again in the end of September annual conference, we release our 2024 state CIO survey. We have a large section on generative AI. This is just one question. I thought I would provide you with some early data. If you go back to that action list, we've actually paired that up and asked the states, okay, well, this is what's out there in terms of recommendations. What are you actually doing? And you see that the majority of them, 3/4 have already created some kind of task force. It may be under the CIO office. It may be executive branch wide. It may be done by legislative enactment, but 3/4 of them have already done that. They're working on enterprise policies, but you can see where we have a significant gap, which is really around things like data, transparency, and accountability. 96% of the state CIOs and chief data officers said that data management and data quality is critically important to the future of generative AI, yet more than 3/4 of the states do not have a data quality or data management program at all. And so there's a significant gap between what they see as needed and what they're going to have to really address in terms of moving forward in terms of steps around that. And part of that is because the data resides in all the agencies, and there's a challenge there. So you see the gap that has to be completed. This is brand new data collected this summer, and so we'll be reporting on that as we deal with the full report coming out end of September. And then finally, a good example of that, just as a one state, we have multiple states that have created an AI and Gen AI strategy and a roadmap. Many of them have robust information sources like California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and others, where they're actually moving forward with test beds. They've got pilots underway. They've created a sandbox. They've got a set of policy frameworks to guide their use. And this is just, I thought, one good, clear example from the latest. South Carolina released their AI strategy in late June, so it's just brand new, and it gives you a good sense of what the states are addressing. It's just one good example of what's going on out there. So those are my quick comments about some top topics, and we will get to the questions after Alan addresses the local government scene. Back to you, Dr. Shark.
All right, thank you, Doug. So let me go back and talk about the local government role and what we see. And we see very similar kind of things, but I do want to start with where Doug started. I came up with this slide from one of these way back things when I first came to PTI some 20 years ago. So here's what the website looked like when it was announced that I came aboard. Kind of amazing to see how much the logo has changed in the 20 years. But we've been very busy. Our surveys will come out later this year. Our AI and cyber survey is in progress. We have another survey that will come out in the fall. But we've been really busy with thought leadership, as is Nacio and Doug, thinking about the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, a thought that came to us because the federal government now requires that in every federal agency, including having a federal CIO council. So AI is a big deal, and AI governance is a big deal, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It somehow even challenges our sense of CIO relevance. There are so many chiefs out there. We count over a dozen in terms of titles. And we have kind of looked at some of the real interesting issues when we see all these policies that pertain to be guardrails and safety valves and like. The people we talk to are in some cases afraid to do anything. And so we've talked about the difference between guardrails versus guide rails. We believe as an association, people should embrace this, should try it, and be careful. And I think you can accomplish all that. But the idea of guardrails protecting all of us is a little scary and does have a chilling effect on many, many governments. And then, of course, the overtrust in government, making AI better than us, what could possibly go wrong. And then, of course, as Doug mentioned, we're all concerned about the essential role of data classification and governance. So there's a lot of moving pieces. So since we don't have our latest surveys, what we do have is a constant network of individuals that we're constantly talking with on a daily basis. So I want to share with you the top 10 issues as we see them. First of all, we look at AI as the great umbrella of all technology. This is not like cloud computing. This is not like identity management or zero trust. This is different. To me, this is the most significant change or challenge since the internet became public. And we view this as a great umbrella where everything falls under. Everything is going to be AI. Already our washing machines are AI. The newest generation of laptops are AI. Our newest self-propelled vacuum cleaners that run around your house are AI. We're going to see more about that. And it is going to require more thoughtfulness in terms of policy and applications. But it does require better leadership. And the challenge for us, and I think Doug and I are pretty much aligned on this, should we follow the federal lead and create another chief position, the chief AI officer? I think, I can't speak for Doug, but I think the answer is hopefully not. If there was ever a role for the CIO, this is it. Now, somebody should be in charge, and that person could be a designee. It could be somebody who helps coordinate. But I think the last thing we need, at least the local government level, is another level of chief. The data integrity, as Doug mentioned, is still a major concern. Comes back to that old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Data governance needs to be better, perfected, and practiced. I think those in the data field welcome this challenge. And then this need. We did a survey last year, and we asked our members how many folks feel they need some training in AI. We were amazed to see something like 90%. We've never had a bar graph go off the charts like that. And not only did they comment about wanting AI training for themselves, but for their staff. So there's this kind of feeling like they really need to know more. We also believe that we've got to do more in AI experimentation. There's too many people that are holding back, waiting for guidelines, and there are things that we can do that I think are very important. And then the conversation between guide rails versus guardrails, I think technology leaders should be providing the guide rails on appropriate use of AI. Now, one of the hats I wear, hence the blackboard, is I am a teacher. I'm a professor at George Mason University and also at Rutgers. And I have to say that when you think about this, this was a chilling moment for the faculty. Totally freaked out. This is the end of education as we know it. And my sense is this is reality. And in my syllabus, I encourage students to use it under certain circumstances. And we have guide rails. Use it. You become more productive. But we remind people there's such a thing called plagiarism. And there is AI checking on AI for that. And now we have a new field that is getting a lot of prominence, which is prompt engineering. Doing a better job of understanding how to ask a question from different angles, different ways, and at different times. Sometimes you can ask different systems the same question and get different answers. Sometimes you can ask the same generative AI, the same question, and get a different answer. So we have to be very mindful of how these systems work and that they're geared more so to give us an answer they think we want statistically than the factual basis of what it is that we are looking for. Big difference. So one framework that I use to think about this, when I talk to people, many say they find this helpful, is think of this as a framework where it has 4 elements. One is for the individual. How can I become more creative and more productive in the time that I have in a given day? How can my staff become individually more productive and creative in a given day? Those are personal use applications. To me, in many ways, they are the low-hanging fruit, as long as you're not sharing publicly identifiable types of information or things that you would not want shared by anybody else. And then the second part of this framework would be, what are the enterprise type applications where most of the attention is going? What are the things that we can do that will have a significant impact in the way we relate to other departments and our citizens? This might take the form of chatbots, which I'm a huge fan of, or doing better data analytics, looking for anomalies and patterns that humans might never, ever see. That's the second. The third is open systems. These are the public systems that many of us gravitate to when it comes to generative AI. And there are many subparts that are offering different kinds of applications. We don't have time to go into some of them, but it's every day there's kind of like a new opening that gives us a new insight of what it can do. But that's open, meaning you put stuff in, you have no idea where it's going. The other one where most governments are focusing as a fourth element is closed. And this is where you have enterprise type systems where you're dealing with a vendor and you're staying within your domain. You're not going outside of that. So you have a better sense that you are securing the data in a more meaningful way. The number 2 area is election integrity and security and deepfake and the like. This is something that probably might have been on the last of a list. But now that we're, really in the heated part of a presidential election, this becomes really important, and it does affect AI folks, especially at the county level. We worry about disinformation and misinformation, and many of our CIOs are actively engaged working with communities to try and share and how things work and make them feel more comfortable about the technology we use, what's connected to the internet, what's not, how are these systems made to be secure, and kind of helping people get a better feel because there's so much misinformation about there. It's all about transparency and trust, but it's been greatly amplified as a number of politicians have really gone below the moral belt, as I would say, by talking about things that are preposterous. Cyber funding. Well, the number one issue on anybody's mind is really cybersecurity. I mean, that is probably the most impactful thing that one has to focus on, because that's the one thing, if something goes wrong, could have the greatest impact for the entire government operation. And so we worry about cyber funding. We watched for a couple of years about the federal program to dole out $1 billion over 5 years. Many local governments really believed that they were going to get a piece of that. And we were kind of like somewhat doubtful. And it looks like, unfortunately, our predictions were right. And that is, there just wasn't an equitable way to do it in the way that many local governments had hoped. It is really being administered by state groups and doing services on behalf of the localities. That's not to say these things aren't useful. It's just not necessarily what they had in mind, but it certainly is a step in the right direction. We worry about staffing and certifications, and I bring up the word certifications because recently we've had some conversations with individuals, CIOs and IT directors, and we had this conversation about worrying about talent, worrying about people who have qualifications. And one of the best is certifications. Now, we know that many states and some localities are abandoning the requirement for a college degree and looking for other forms of competencies. In talking with one local government individual yesterday, they were saying that their local government did not want to go in that way without something in return. And they are now requiring certifications, which raises a question. What about recertifications? In many conversations, many people look at the certifications one brings to the table, and they don't follow up and say, who has been recertified? We want our CPAs recertified. We want our airline pilots to be recertified, because recertification means that there's an obligation to continue learning and show that there's a proficiency towards that goal. And so, message here, look at recertifications of staff. And if they need help, I think it's not punitive. It's like, help them get those recertifications. We also worry about zero trust as it's applied, wondering, is there really such a thing? And how does zero trust work in an AI environment where more of these systems are becoming more automated? And that becomes a problem. Yes, AI. So number 4, talent, and the 3 R's, retention, reward, and recruit. All of this is an enormous problem and a challenge. Some have talked about a morale issue because understaffed puts a burden on everybody else. It is an issue with no obvious solutions. And then we look at the changing role of the CIO. I think that's happening more and more. AI is presenting greater challenges. And I think there's a sea shift in the requirements of what does a CIO look like today, the job description itself. When you think about it, the last decade, it has really morphed from someone who has technical knowledge to someone who has high degrees of emotional intelligence and professional skills that can get things done through human contact and the like. So we've really moved from managership to leadership in this area. And I think looking at the surveys that NASCIO has done, I love the survey, Doug, that you have, and I think you repeated the same question years later. Where does technologists wind up in the top 10 of proficiencies for the future? And technologists wound up being number 9, I think, in both surveys starting in 2018. The rise of MSPs, that really is only part of the story. I think we're going to see more dependency on working with the private sector. I think we're going to look at them not just as managed services, but also as partners. And this is a long time coming. I think much of this came to a head with the pandemic, when we suddenly realized that our vendor community were suddenly our best friends. They did things that we never thought possible, totally altruistic. They were there for local governments, and I assume for state governments as well. And I think that goodwill has not shifted. And so to me, this is a very positive thing. So number 6 is, I think, given all the staff and talent issues, we're going to have to, by default, manage that. That does not mean the CIO goes away, but it will mean the role of the CIO will probably shift. And then IT modernization, harmonization, the ability to update our systems and to make sure they are talking with each other is more important than ever. And then we have to deal with some of the other societal issues that do impact us. The rejection of expertise and the rise of ignorance is really demoralizing for many who see things in a very different light, and the politicization of everything. So you're saying, oh, wait, I only see 9. There is a 10th. I don't want to spend too much time because I want to address your questions. I think we've got to address climate impact. it does affect us in air quality, water, health, food, energy, transportation, shelter, and all of that. And before I leave this slide, think about all the weather events that we have heard. Now, there are still people who are in denial, but those who have suffered through floods, I mean, the word unprecedented is kind of a word that has no meaning anymore. We have had a lot of shift in temperatures. For the first time, we have cities, 5 cities in the United States that have chief heat officers. We have more people dying from heat exhaustion or heat-related deaths. We have more people that are infected by diseases because of a longer insect season. We have the growth of mosquitoes and other kinds of plant life. It is threatening everything we do, and we do have the technology to at least monitor, become more aware, and use new technologies to thwart, using different, more reflective paint in our rooftops, in our pavement, being able to monitor all the levels of pollution and oxygen levels, and let alone temperatures, and maybe get into more realistic wet bulb measurement. These things are going to affect and could provide great instability. So it's a big deal. The Pentagon has said this is one of the top 3 things that they're worried about when it comes to the future. So we've talked about all things AI. I just wanted to mention, Doug knows there's a great book out there called Artificial Intelligence, a primer for state and local government, everything you need to know since yesterday. And the title is there to kind of hedge bets. Things are changing every day, but it's very foundational. Something, if you're interested in, you may want to take a look. You can get that on Amazon. And also many of the things that you saw that I mentioned about the writings and whatnot, some of our books you can all find on the website, sharkbites.net. And then finally, before we turn it to the questions, NASCIO is a wonderful ASPTI, great source. And if you go to their resource center, you get all sorts of wonderful reports and also past reports. There is no association that has such an array of meaningful, impactful reports. So I hand it to NASCIO for all the great work. And their next annual event will be in New Orleans, the end of September, early October. It is a huge event. Our next event is November. Before that, the JW Marriott Mall of America, where we have our Gov IT Leadership Summit and Symposium. We will be at the Mall of America, and we hope to see many of you there if that's possible. So that's it. Doug, we now have time to answer questions. First of all, is there any comments you want to make about any of the slides that I mentioned?
I got a couple. One, I appreciate the shout out for our resources in our conference. The check is in the mail. The Venmo transfers in the mail. The Shark book on AI. I've read the entire thing. Very good points, and it can be very, very useful. Referred to some of the just generalized comment in a couple of past testimonies in the last month. Because this is getting a lot of interest from our legislative body. Alan's comments on climate, it kind of makes me go back in the internet time machine. Many years ago, NASCIO had a green IT subcommittee, a green IT working group, and we produced two or three reports. We produced an actual DVD video with green IT, and that was I think 2007, 2008, we talked about what states need to do, state CIOs. And then within a few months, we had the Great Recession, and no one paid attention to it again. So it's kind of interesting how that was at the moment. We were on a real run there with discussing the impact of climate, impact of disaster recovery, resiliency, business continuity. That is something we have to continue to look at. But you're right, we've had several state capitals in the last couple of years that have been inundated by floods, where their data centers have been impacted. And I think that's something that they have to take seriously, including a couple that have had to relocate because of that. So they need to understand, and the fact that they are creating, they certainly have a climate impact with what they're doing. So I guess we have a number of questions. We'd like to get to those. We had a number of questions that were submitted in advance with registration, and I want to kind of talk about the management and funding, and I will collapse a number of these because they're kind of similar. But I'll give you a quick update. As of this week, 48 states, excuse me, 48 states have enacted their fiscal year 2025 budgets. We still think, I think Michigan is still holding out. The governor's reviewing that. There's a few others, but again, 48 states have enacted their budgets already for 2025. We're seeing in some cases some slight increases, but I think you're looking at a fairly straight line budget from the previous years. States are obviously looking at the massive rainy day funds that they've accumulated and how they're going to use that. And others, a number of states, their April and May revenue targets. So they always use consensus forecasting, and looking at the NASBO data a few weeks ago, it looked like at least through May, the revenue estimates were fairly on track. But because we have some new tax and revenue provisions that go into effect went into effect on July 1 for some states, and many states are reducing that. So we're going to see how that impacts the states in terms of their operating revenue. But so far, they seem to be doing very well in terms of the revenue, with a few states like California and others, Arizona, a few that have had some hits. California is the most serious in terms of having to make substantial budget cuts and being several $billion in terms of running a deficit for a variety of reasons. Most of that from the reduction in corporate revenue, but also some large expenses. So I don't see things having massive changes. What may occur, and in 2026, you have the ARPA funding. The ARPA funding expires in terms of their ability to actually obligate is in December of 2026. So about 80+% or more of the states have actually already allocated their funds. They may not have spent those funds, but they've already been obligated and allocated to the agencies. That was, the $200 billion that went out under ARPA and the Corona Relief Act. So they have already moved along pretty quickly in that, but they have 2 years to finally spend that money. So I suspect most states will get that out the door. And I think the question on the table is, where will they have what people have concerned about, the fiscal cliff in 2026, because they've been relying on these federal funds for the last several years to support their budget. If you look at how did they spend those ARPA funds, almost 20% were spent on state administration and operations. So they were using it in lieu of their own budgetary funds to run state administration and operations. So that's going to have to shift. They may be obviously looking at utilizing their very large rainy day funds that they've been able to accumulate because they've been spending federal dollars. So that share of the federal dollar, the share of the pie in terms of revenue, is going to go down for the states. And so I suspect most of them have already begun to look at that in their budgets. But I would point anybody who's interested in the details, NASBO, our friends at National Association of State Budget Officers, have regular reports out. Their fiscal survey of the states just came out in June, and also regular blogs analyzing current trends. And so I will answer all those questions by saying that's the best place to get data, as opposed to listening to Doug. So that covers some of the financial stuff at the state level.
Cool. If I could, as long as we're staying with financial issues, our last survey done in 2023 showed a significant increase in overall IT funding. And, it looked really good. I was like, wow, this is really good news. But what we didn't say in that same report is what inflation did to that. So the real question is, you might be showing a positive trend on a bar graph, but what about the true purchasing power in terms of what are you going to get? And even though there's an increase, is that really enough? Is it really meaningful? And hopefully with our next survey, we'll have a better sense of the answer to that question.
We will be talking about that, Al. A good point, because we have seen increases in cybersecurity funding, significant increases. And that was part of our call to action many years ago, was that the funding was not commensurate to the risk at the state level, and that states should really move toward a dedicated line item for cybersecurity, rather than asking the agencies, in particular the CIO agency, to take it out of their hide and try to find the money. We said those dollars are embedded. There should be a dedicated budget. One of the data results that you'll see coming out is about 60% of the states now have a dedicated budget for cybersecurity. So we still have a gap, but I think we are at least pleased to see that we've seen increases in many states in cybersecurity funding, which has been a significant challenge for many, many years.
Cool. Let me, if I could, take one, and I'll ask you to take one on AI and innovation. One of the questions that was presented, how would we recommend AI being incorporated into the workplace? And that comes back to my little uh, framework that I mentioned earlier, in two ways, in two categories. One is, how do we equip our staff with better tools to do more, to become more productive? And I'm finding that many people are really doing it. They're afraid to report it. And that means that there's an environment where there's some fear because they keep hearing about guide rails and guardrails. What is all this stuff? Where are the policies? Am I okay to do it? And what should I avoid? So there is some basic training that needs to happen. But when it comes to personal productivity, things like asking AI for help in coming up with a paper in terms of an outline. I'm amazed how many people haven't used it for the most obvious things. Thinking of, give me a list of this, summarize this meeting for me. And I have been to a number of Zoom meetings recently where suddenly there is somebody's name that I don't recognize, and it is really an AI bot that is transcribing everything, and it attributes it to whoever spoke and then summarizes it. So it is a real productivity tool in helping us with our calendars, setting up meetings. There are like 20 ways in which individuals can benefit by using it in the right ways. They're out there now. But that raises questions. Who pays for it? Because the better services require subscriptions. And they all look very similar, $20 a month. Are there enterprise licenses that they could have? Does everybody need the same access? And then we enter Microsoft Copilot. How does that fill in the blanks? And maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't rely on any one. I use different ones for different things. The second bucket is going to be the enterprise solutions. And to me, the most exciting thing is the chatbot or virtual assistant. I have an article coming out later today, and it's going to be called The Power of Intelligent Voice. And, the next frontier in AI for this year is going to be, we're talking to these systems. We know that Alexa is 9 years old, and we will be talking, so we are going to be freed from the keyboard. That raises some interesting opportunities for us in terms of being able to look at things from a different angle, converse with these machines, and this whole human-machine partnership is about to explode. But getting back to chatbots, they can augment our 311 systems. They can perhaps even help us with 911 systems in times of emergency, at least for inbound, and routing it to the right individual. Today, we have the technology, as never before, that can measure intensity of voice. There's AI offerings out there that actually can measure distress, deceit, and all other forms of emotional intelligence from hundreds of thousands of different conversations. These have a great way of helping us sort out one from the other. So to me, communicating and augmenting staff, not replacing, augmenting these applications is really key in enterprise AI. The other would be obviously looking at how we can better use our data. That can be done in public safety, public management, public works, analyzing bus routes, analyzing transportation resources, analyzing budgets. But wherever there is data, AI will be there, if it's not already, to look at things. And case in point, there's a new thing every day. I was talking the other day to one of the tech managers at the city of Boston, and they're already working with their procurement folks in developing a procurement bot to help streamline things, not to replace anybody, but speed up the process, which pains all of us on the technology side. So a lot of exciting things. Those are just some of examples. Back to you, Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And I guess I would, how do you recommend that AI be incorporated in the workplace? Because a lot of AI questions. My response to that would be by design rather than by default. And I say that a lot about emerging technologies because unfortunately in the public sector, that's what we see is that these emerging technologies are incorporated by default because they're, in this case, Chat GPT 3.5 readily available. They're free online tools, but that doesn't mean that all employees should be using this without some type of responsible,
Yes.
again, use guidelines. And I think our data shows that, more than half of the employees are already using these tools. So now you have the same challenge you had with other emerging technologies and technologies in general, which is shadow. So we now have shadow Gen AI. And so you have to be very careful about that in terms of what they are using. We've had a few states that are blocking their use. We have a few states that are blocking access to these tools because of those concerns. And you also have to look at there's a policy side of this that you'd be concerned about. There's also legal side. You talked about using the AI assistants on things like Zoom. We have an AI assistant running. General counsels are going to argue that in terms of government meetings and deliberations, those tools should not be invoked because they create a full transcript. That is not, you don't want that information as a public record because that's not what's considered. That could be discoverable. It may not be an open public record, but again, some of the legal folks providing guidance to the general counsels to state agencies are going to saying we do not want you using. We're going to prohibit you from using these tools because they don't comply with our current policies around open meetings. And so I think that's something you just can't look at this as a major benefit and turn these things on. So there's a lot of policy considerations you have to consider with that. Yeah, I like this question, where is AI most needed for government services and where are we actually seeing it deployed? So you will see a significant amount of this data, real empirical data in our upcoming survey. But I will tell you that when you look at the CIOs and we ask them, again, where should it be? Where's aspirationally, where do you want to see Gen AI deployed? Number one, far and away, was enhanced digital services for citizens. What Alan, you were just talking about, AI-enabled chatbots and capabilities that are more intelligent than simply augmented intelligence that we've had before. So again, I think digital services, cybersecurity operations, a very strong number two. Number three, fraud and anti-fraud detection. We haven't talked about that, but that is a major benefit that we're going to see in terms of the models today, which would predominantly pay and chase. And if you look at things like the Pandemic Unemployment Relief Fund, GAOs report estimated $220 billion, 220 billion US federal tax dollars was lost due to fraud for unemployment. And again, a lot of that was because of synthetic identities and multiple individuals basically absconding with that by getting through the UI claim system. And so I think we're going to see hopefully Gen AI, but those are three that have already been identified. To tie it into another question, a set of questions we got about the new ADA rule on web accessibility. There's tremendous promise for Gen AI to assist in that in terms of one of the first things that states should do is conduct a kind of an accessibility audit across all of that. Gen AI tools can really assist in that. However, there's also the negative side and the downside of that, and that many Gen AI tools have not been cannot accommodate accessibility provisions because they have inherent biases in their large language models. They were not trained against a non-accessible workforce. Like 14% of the US population has some type of accessibility, have some kind of disability. So that's something we're going to have to address in the future. We issued a white paper on this in late June on revolutionizing assistance. And so if you're interested in that, it's on the NASCIO website, and we'll probably do additional research on that whole topic about how, again, that can be extremely beneficial, but there's also downsides to deploying Gen AI to a population that has some type of disability because it could be problematic for them.
I'm hoping though that voice aspect will be a real help. So one of the questions here, Doug, is what are the top 3 technology focus areas, for example, cybersecurity AI, that CIOs are using their budget dollars for projecting ahead to 2025? Is your research giving you that indicator?
Say that again. I just lost audio there for a second, Alan.
Oh, okay. The question is, what are the top 3 technology focus areas that CIOs are budgeting their dollars for 2025?
Cybersecurity, legacy modernization, identity and access management, cloud services. Those are all, when you look at identity and access management, was actually number 1 in our investment top 10, and you can find that on the NASCIO website. It's a complimentary second list to the priority top 10. So on the NASCIO website, you will actually see, we asked the CIOs, where do they tend to invest in 2024? And you will see identity and access management is number one. So we see that as a real thread, a foundational piece across so many different areas like cybersecurity, the ability to deliver enhanced digital services, again, the security piece of that. And we've held a couple of webinars on where states are going this year already in terms of the reliance on perhaps the driver's license, that the foundational document for issuing digital credentials in the future, which is a discussion that certainly we've been having with AMBA and the DMV directors. So there's working on those standards around mobile driver's license, the MDLs.
So I would agree that many of the things you mentioned would probably track well for local government. I would say the one thing people are not budgeting for is AI as a category. It's being funded differently, so they may put in citizen-facing technologies. I think that's a safer way to do it, but I don't think you're going to see a budget item yet. There could be one of these days for AI, but it is so separated out. And then when we talk about cybersecurity, I did some research over a period of time and came up with a surprising list of 14 areas where artificial intelligence can really assist with cybersecurity. And I thought, wow, this is great. And then in the middle of the night, I had this nightmare and I realized I would be doing any reader a disservice by not pointing out the negatives associated with all the positives. And one of the worries that we have to have is over-reliance on technology. Brings me back to 2001: A Space Odyssey, when Hal took over and said, you know, you are now an impediment to our mission, and try to kill off the whole crew. He got one, but in the end, he lost. But that was 50 years ago. And now suddenly this issue has resurfaced, over-reliance.
Dating yourself, Alan, on that one.
I was just a kid. I was just a little kid.
Just a whippersnapper. Yeah, I think what your point is, and I actually spoke to this Monday at another cyber briefing, was that, again, Gen AI, double-edged sword in terms of, you know, as I said, the blade swings both way, because you also have the bad actors and our foreign adversaries, our nation states, you know, the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, they're all already using Gen AI capabilities. And so certainly the public sector is behind on those capabilities. They're already using it to create, for example, you know, incredible synthetic medias that can be synthetic identities that can be used, and it can be very troublesome to detect those. And then we've got, you know, using those capabilities against the states. So bad actors using Gen AI. So we're going to have to thwart that. But I think there's plenty of positives there in terms of what they can do to again to supplement and complement our survey data. When asked that question, and you can see that report on our website about the impact on the state IT workforce and Gen AI, I think it was only one or two states said that they expect Gen AI services to have an impact in terms of reducing the workforce. They see it as opportunities to supplement and complement the workforce. I think there's obviously a lot of fear, quote, fear out there among maybe the state workforce and state IT workforce in particular about that impact, but they don't, certainly leadership doesn't see it that way. They see it as a way to complement and supplement and enhance the capabilities of their existing workforce, recognizing the large gap is the lack of education and training and skills that they need to really ramp up, you know, very quickly to get their employees to understand that. The survey that I think that came out yesterday said that only 30% of the public sector workforce really understands what generative AI is. And so I
It's
think we've
true.
got.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, we're about running out of time, but it's an important topic. I tell people AI is not going to replace you, but it may hinder the growth of the public workforce, because when somebody leaves, you might say, well, you're doing so much more, we don't need to fill that other position. So I agree, Doug. I think most of us who follow this see this as an augmenting kind of activity, but it will impact the number of headcounts down the road. It means less positions will be opened. We will have to be more productive, and the people who are the most valuable to an organization will have mastered AI. So those who don't, they're the ones that have to be careful. And so there we are. Well, we're out of time. Doug, it is a pleasure. It always goes by so quickly. What's really exciting as a tease, when we come together again in January, we'll have fresh new data, resources, and charts and pie charts and graphs. to back up some of our predictions. That's the event. We bring in anywhere from 350. One year we had 500 people on there. So it's really a lot of fun. It's always fun working with Doug. For those who joined it maybe a little late, we did record this, and anybody who registered will get a link so that they can go back and take a look. If you have any questions, just go to nascio.org. On the state side, if you have questions for us on the PTI side, it's pti.org. We've been around long enough where we have simple URLs. So that's really a benefit. We were in there early, unlike others that have these very strange names. So Doug, thank you so much. And thank
Thank you.
everybody for joining us today.
Have a great rest of the week. Thank you.